Welcome to Echoes of the Midnight, a channel where every whisper hides a haunting truth. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the midnight tales pull you into their chilling embrace. The question is, can you make it to the end?
Snowhaven was a town that seemed pulled from the pages of a holiday postcard. Quaint shops lined the main street, their windows glowing with warm light. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and freshly baked gingerbread wafted through the air, wrapping the town in the embrace of Christmas cheer. Families bustled through the streets, arms heavy with shopping bags and hearts light with the season's joy. Children clung to their parents, gazing wide-eyed at the towering Christmas tree in the town square, its ornaments reflecting the flickering lights strung around it. But on the outskirts of this festive haven, in a small, solitary house at the end of Birch Lane, darkness was stirring. Maggie Green was a woman of routine. Every morning she woke before dawn to brew her tea, water the plants that lined her windowsill, and feed her tabby cat Whiskers. She lived alone, her life quiet and predictable, just the way she liked it. She worked at the town library, where her meticulous nature served her well, and returned home each evening to the same rituals. Christmas Eve was no exception. Maggie had finished her workday, her final task being the delicate arrangement of books in the library's holiday display. She had exchanged pleasantries with the other librarians, politely declining invitations to join their family gatherings. "I like the quiet," she had said with a soft smile. By the time she returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the snowflakes falling outside her window blurred into a shimmering curtain. Inside her modest house, Maggie hummed along to carols playing on the radio, decorating a small tabletop tree with handmade ornaments. She paused to admire her work, the soft glow of the fairy lights reflecting in her glasses. But as the clock struck 9 p.m., her peaceful evening was shattered. A faint sound reached her ears. A soft, deliberate knock on the door. Startled, Maggie froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. Whiskers darted under the couch, his tail puffed like a bottle brush. Maggie's unease grew as she approached the door, her heart thudding in her chest. Through the peephole, she saw him, a man in a Santa suit, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. He stood motionless, one hand clutching a bulging sack slung over his shoulder. Despite the costume, there was something wrong, something off about the way he stood. Too still, too rigid. "Can I help you?" Maggie called through the door, her voice trembling. "I have a special delivery," the man replied, his tone unnervingly cheerful for Maggie Green. Her breath caught. How did he know her name? She glanced at the lock, debating whether to open the door or call for help. But before she could decide, the door burst inward with a force that sent her sprawling backward. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight illuminated a horrific scene. Maggie Green's lifeless body was discovered by a neighbor who had stopped by to wish her a Merry Christmas. The front door was ajar, snow drifting inside to mingle with the crimson stains on the hardwood floor. Maggie's body was staged like a grotesque Christmas decoration, wrapped in tinsel and positioned on her couch. Candy cane was clasped in her stiff hand, its bright red stripes mirrored by the blood that streaked her pale face. Detective John Martin arrived at the scene shortly after. A tall man with graying hair and a face etched with years of experience, John was known for his unyielding determination and sharp instincts. But even he wasn't prepared for what awaited him inside. The living room, once cozy and inviting, was now a shrine to violence. On the wall, scrawled in jagged red letters, were the words, "This Santa brings fear, not joy." John scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the details, the forced entry, the methodical staging of the body, the sinister message. Whoever had done this wasn't just a murderer. They were sending a message, taunting the town and the law. He stepped outside to gather his thoughts, the icy air biting at his skin. Snowhaven had always been a place of peace, where crimes rarely exceeded petty theft or the occasional bar brawl, but this was different. John had seen darkness in his career, but it had always been elsewhere, in bigger cities, far from the quiet streets of Snowhaven. That night, as the town's lights flickered against the falling snow, an unsettling tension settled over Snowhaven. Doors were locked, curtains drawn, and whispers spread like wildfire. No one knew it yet, but the killer wasn't finished. The silent night was only the beginning. Christmas morning in Snowhaven was usually a time for joy, filled with the sounds of children tearing open presents and families gathering for hearty breakfasts. But this year, the festive air felt heavy, like a blanket soaked with fear. Word of Maggie Green's murder had spread like wildfire, leaving the town on edge. By midday, the unease turned to outright panic. The local mall, a centerpiece of Snowhaven's Christmas festivities, became the scene of yet another horror. The night before, the mall had been a lively hub of last-minute shoppers. A man dressed as Santa Claus had taken up residence near the oversized Christmas tree, handing out small, gift-wrapped boxes to delighted children. Parents smiled indulgently, assuming it was part of the mall's holiday promotions. But something about this Santa seemed wrong. His movements were too stiff, his smile too forced, and his eyes, cold and unblinking, lacked the warmth one would expect from Saint Nick. When a young girl eagerly opened her gift at home, the laughter in the room froze. Inside was a doll's head, severed cleanly from its body. Its eyes were replaced with crudely stitched buttons, giving it a grotesque, lifeless stare. The family dismissed it as a sick prank, but by morning, it was clear the gift was part of something much darker. Detective John Martin arrived at the mall just after the janitor made a grim discovery. The storage room at the back of the building, typically filled with boxes of decorations and cleaning supplies, was now a macabre crime scene. A woman's body was sprawled on the cold concrete floor, her face painted with a grotesque smile that mirrored the expression of the doll. John stood at the threshold, his breath visible in the frigid air. The storage room smelled of bleach and decay, a sharp contrast to the cheerful cinnamon and pine scents wafting through the rest of the mall. The woman's body had been carefully posed, her arms crossed over her chest, with a string of holiday lights wrapped tightly around her neck. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, wide open, as if frozen in her final moment of terror. Nearby, John spotted a piece of paper tucked neatly under her hand. The note was written in the same jagged crimson script as the one found at Maggie Green's house. It read, "Christmas isn't about giving. It's about taking." John's jaw tightened. The message wasn't just cruel, it was personal. This killer wasn't just taking lives. They were taking the meaning of Christmas itself and twisting it into something monstrous. Outside the storage room, the mall had been evacuated, but a crowd had gathered beyond the police tape. Parents clutched their children tightly, whispering anxiously among themselves. The media had arrived, their cameras capturing the rising fear in Snowhaven. By the time the evening news aired, the Christmas slasher back in his office, John pored over the case files, his mind racing. 2 victims in less than 24 hours, each murder more theatrical than the last. The killer wasn't random. They were building something, a story, a spectacle. And Snowhaven was their stage. The doll's head felt like a clue, a symbolic thread tying the murders together. The buttons sewn into the doll's eyes, the victim's forced smile, it all pointed to an obsession with control, with manipulating appearances. John couldn't shake the feeling that the killer wanted to be seen, to be understood, as if these gruesome acts were their way of speaking. As the sun set on Christmas Day, Snowhaven's streets emptied, and a heavy silence fell over the town. People locked their doors and drew their curtains, the festive glow of Christmas lights now casting eerie shadows. Somewhere in the darkness, John knew the killer was watching, waiting for their next move. And as he stared at the message in his hand, one thought haunted him. The killer isn't finished. Not by a long shot. Detective John Martin leaned back in his worn leather chair, the faint hum of the station's fluorescent lights grating against his nerves. The weight of the case pressed down on him like a lead blanket. 2 murders, both brutal and staged, and still no clear leads. The killer wasn't just taking lives. They were crafting a story, one horrifying chapter at a time. And John had the sinking feeling he was running out of time to stop them. Snowhaven wasn't a town known for darkness. Sure, there were small-town squabbles, the occasional scandal, but nothing like this. Yet, as John delved into its records, he uncovered a history far more twisted than the cheerful facade suggested. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon the story of Kevin Reynolds. 20 years ago, on Christmas Eve, tragedy struck the Reynolds family. Their home, a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town, went up in flames in the dead of night. The fire was so fierce that by the time neighbors arrived, there was nothing left but smoldering ruins and the faint scent of ash on the winter wind. Inside, the charred remains of Kevin's parents and younger sister were found. The official report called it an accident, a tragic case of faulty wiring. But whispers in Snowhaven told a different story. Some said Kevin's father had been a hard man, prone to outbursts, and the fire was the result of a fight gone wrong. Others believed Kevin himself had started it, though no evidence ever surfaced to prove it. What struck John most was a single detail buried in the old police reports. Kevin had been found standing outside the burning house, barefoot in the snow, watching the flames consume everything he'd ever known. When officers arrived, they described his expression as eerily calm, as if the boy was a detached observer rather than a grieving child. Kevin disappeared not long after the fire, placed briefly into foster care before vanishing entirely. No one had heard from him since. But now, with Snowhaven gripped by fear, John's gut told him Kevin was back. And he was angry. As John pieced together the fragments of Kevin's story, the killers struck again. This time, the victim was Mr. Harold Grayson, the town's beloved shopkeeper. Harold's general store had been a corner store of Snowhaven for decades, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and Harold always had a warm smile and a free piece of candy for the kids. That morning, when Harold didn't open his shop, a concerned customer peeked through the window. What they saw froze them in place. Harold's body was slumped in his chair, his face twisted in a grotesque smile, eerily similar to the doll found in the mall murder. Christmas lights were strung tightly around his neck, the bulbs still glowing faintly, casting a macabre halo around his lifeless form. John arrived moments later, his stomach sinking at the sight. The killer had left another note, this one scrawled on the counter in Harold's own red marker. Not everyone deserves a Merry Christmas. The crime scene was chillingly deliberate. Harold's store, once a place of warmth and joy, now felt suffocating, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood. It was as if the killer was stripping away everything Snowhaven held dear, piece by piece. Back at the station, John spread out the case files across his desk. The connections were becoming clearer. The theatrical nature of the murders, the calculated use of Christmas imagery, and the messages designed to taunt the town. This wasn't random, it was personal. Kevin Reynolds, or whoever he had become, was sending a message to Snowhaven. A twisted revenge for the life he'd lost. But why now? What had triggered this spree after 20 years of silence? And more importantly, how far was the killer willing to go? As the day turned to night, John felt the pressure mounting. Snowhaven wasn't just facing a murderer, it was facing a ghost of its past, resurrected with a vengeance. And unless John could find him soon, he knew the next chapter in the killer's story would be even bloodier. Outside, the town huddled in fear, locking their doors and dousing their lights. But John couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, Kevin was watching, waiting for his next move. And this time, the silent night was growing louder with every passing hour. Detective John Martin was out of options. The murders had turned Snowhaven into a town gripped by fear, its festive cheer replaced with whispers of paranoia and suspicion. If the killer wasn't stopped soon, John knew the bloodshed would escalate. He needed to draw them out, force their hand. With the mayor's reluctant approval, John announced a grand Christmas festival to take place in the town's central park. It was a bold, almost reckless move. A towering Christmas tree, glowing with thousands of multicolored lights, would be the centerpiece. Carolers, food stalls, and families were invited to create the illusion of normalcy. The announcement sparked outrage among some residents. "You're putting us all at risk," one woman shouted at a town meeting. But John stood firm. "This isn't just a festival," he said. "It's a trap." As the night of the festival approached, the tension was palpable. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the park in a soft white glow, while officers, disguised as festival-goers, mingled with the crowd. John had stationed plainclothes police at every entrance and exit, scanning for anything suspicious. His eyes darted between the Santas scattered throughout the park, each one hired by the town to entertain the children. To the untrained eye, it looked like a picture-perfect Christmas celebration. Children squealed with delight as they played near the glowing tree. Vendors handed out cups of steaming cocoa. But beneath the surface, an undercurrent of dread rippled through the air. John knew the killer wouldn't be able to resist such a spectacle. Halfway through the evening, just as the mayor stepped up to the podium to begin the countdown for the tree lighting, the lights flickered. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Then the lights went out completely, plunging the park into darkness. The silence was shattered by a piercing scream. John's flashlight flickered on, illuminating the source of the commotion. Near the base of the giant Christmas tree, a man dressed as Santa lay sprawled on the ground. His chest was impaled with a sharpened candy cane, the blood seeping through his red suit in dark, glistening streaks. Gasps and cries erupted from the crowd as people stumbled away from the gruesome sight. Officers moved quickly, securing the scene, but John's attention was on the object clutched in the dead man's hand. A folded piece of paper. Taking a deep breath, John unfolded the note. The familiar, jagged handwriting stared back at him. "You can't stop me. Christmas is my time." The killer had struck in the middle of John's carefully orchestrated operation and escaped without a trace. For a moment, John's frustration boiled over. He clenched his fists, furious at himself for underestimating the killer's audacity. But then, amidst the chaos of panicked festival-goers, something caught his eye. A figure, moving against the tide of fleeing people. Calm, John's instincts screamed at him to follow. He moved quickly but quietly, slipping through the crowd as the figure disappeared into the shadows beyond the park. The trail led him down a snow-covered alleyway, past rows of darkened buildings, and finally to the outskirts of town. Ahead, the figure slipped into an abandoned warehouse. The structure loomed like a skeletal giant, its broken windows and rusted metal frame casting jagged shadows in the moonlight. John paused outside, his breath visible in the freezing air. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation. He knew this was it, the end game. Drawing his gun, John stepped inside. The warehouse was eerily silent, the only sound the faint creak of the wind through the rafters. A single string of dim Christmas lights hung haphazardly along one wall, their weak glow casting unsettling shadows. As John's eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw what could only be described as the killer's lair. The walls were covered in photographs of the victims, each one defaced with jagged red marks. Newspaper clippings about the murders were pinned alongside them, along with fragments of old family photos. At the center of the room stood a mannequin dressed as Santa, its face painted with the same grotesque smile that had adorned the shopkeepers. "Welcome, detective," Kevin said, stepping out from the shadows. He was taller than John expected, his frame wiry but tense with coiled energy. His eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill racing up John's spine. In his hand, he held a hunting knife, the blade glinting in the faint glow of a single string of Christmas lights hanging on the wall. "You finally found me," Kevin continued, his voice unnervingly calm, almost conversational. "You've been chasing the ghost of Christmas past, haven't you? Well, here I am, the ghost made flesh." John raised his gun, his hands steady, despite the tension crackling in the air. "It's over, Kevin," he said firmly. "Put the knife down and let's end this." Kevin chuckled, a low, bitter sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "End this?" he sneered. "You think this can end? Do you know what Christmas really means, detective? It's not joy. It's not family. It's pain. It's loss. It's a cruel reminder of everything I've been denied." He gestured to the room around him with a dramatic sweep of his knife. "This town, they let my family burn. They turned their backs on me, on a scared little boy left standing in the snow. And now, I'm here to make them feel what I felt." John's grip on his gun tightened. He needed to keep Kevin talking, to buy time for the backup he knew was on its way. "You think killing them will bring you peace?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "It won't. You're just spreading more pain, more loss." Kevin's expression twisted into something darker. "Peace," he spat. "I don't want peace. I want justice. I want them to know what it feels like to lose everything. I want them to see Christmas for what it really is, a lie." Without warning, Kevin lunged, the knife flashing toward John in a blur of silver. But John was faster. His training kicked in, and a single shot rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. Kevin stumbled, the knife clattering to the floor as he clutched his shoulder, blood staining his shirt in a growing crimson bloom. Kevin fell to his knees, gasping, but still defiant. "You think this stops me?" he rasped. You think locking me up will make a difference? I'll be back. Christmas always comes again. Moments later, the warehouse was flooded with flashing red and blue lights as backup arrived. Officers stormed in, their weapons drawn, but the danger had already passed. Kevin was cuffed and hauled to his feet, his face a twisted mask of pain and fury. John watched silently as they dragged him out into the snow. The bitter wind bit at his face, but he barely felt it. Kevin's parting words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder that this wasn't just a case. It was a wound that would scar Snowhaven for years to come. In the days that followed, Snowhaven slowly began to heal. The festival resumed, this time with a somber undercurrent, as the town honored the victims. Families came together, finding solace in one another and in the light of the Christmas tree that now stood as a symbol of resilience. For John Martin, the season would never feel the same. As he sat in his quiet office on Christmas Eve, he stared at the photos from the case, now filed away but still vivid in his mind. The warehouse, the notes, Kevin's chilling smile. It was all burned into his memory. John hastily raised a glass of whiskey to the darkened window, murmuring to himself, "Merry Christmas, Snowhaven." But even as he spoke the words, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some dark corner of the world, Kevin's twisted legacy was far from over.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.